everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm joined by local Las Vegas author Paul Papa. He's the author of several fiction and nonfiction titles, including Haunted Las Vegas, Desert Dust, Discovering Vintage Las Vegas, and the Maximum Rossi Crime Noir series, as well as a new title that will be coming out soon. Paul, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
You obviously have a very strong interest in Las Vegas. So I'm curious, were you a writer before you moved here or developed your interest in Las Vegas, or did Las Vegas come first and then the writing?
Las Vegas came first and then the writing. I had kind of always wanted to be a writer when I was a kid, but I never really delved into it. Didn't know if I could do it or had any talent toward it. When I came to Las Vegas, I got a job as a security officer, and I started writing security reports. And I showed a bit of a knack for it. And so I would always get assigned the security reports because I could write them and I could write them quickly. And through that, I kind of learned how to write. Did
you use those security reports for inspiration or just the process?
It kind of taught me how to write. And strangely enough, it taught me how to write properly and quickly, because you'd have to write the report when the incident happened, and you only had, maybe an hour, sometimes a half hour to write the report. And you had to write it right then and there. And, I'm old enough that this was before computers. So you had to write it out and then type it up, and it had to be done right, because the security department that I worked for, I was at the Sands, only had one auto-correcting typewriter. So the typewriter that we had didn't correct itself. So you had to make sure you typed it right the first time. It also taught me it developed the habit of being able to just sit down and write at any time, because you wrote when the incident happened. So I can still do that to this day. Most people have a set writing schedule that they do. I can actually sit down and write at any time, because I've trained myself for all of my security years to do that.
I'm sure there are lots of people who would be very jealous of being able to sit down and write just whenever. Like, I wish I could do that. If I had a superpower, if I could have a superpower, it would be that.
It's a nice one to have, and I tell you, and it's from 15 years of doing it, from sitting down with those security reports whenever that incident came in, and you can't wait for inspiration. You have to write, and you have to write well. That doesn't mean that everything I write when I sit down is good. Sometimes I write a bunch of junk that has to be rewritten, but at least I can sit and write.
Yeah. Even writing garbage is better than not getting anything down at all, I think. So yeah,
that is very true.
That is awesome.
Sometimes you have to write garbage to get to the good stuff.
Absolutely. So did you move to Vegas for work initially, or was there another reason?
What I tell everybody is that I grew up in Wyoming, and I grew up where it's really cold. And I was working I had a job in a lumber mill, and I worked graveyard, and it was my job to make sure that the mill didn't start on fire. I had to walk around every hour to make sure there was no spark or something going on. Now, that's kind of ironic, because this is Wyoming in the middle of the winter, and fire couldn't have started if it wanted to. And I thought, I don't want to live here anymore. And so I tell people that I strapped a snow shovel in the front of my Jeep and drove till somebody asked me what it was. But the true story is my wife at the time was a school teacher, and they were hiring 1,000 school teachers. And so we came down here for her job.
Okay.
And I never left. So I've been here for about 30 years. That was 1989.
Okay, 1989. That's a very different time than now. Is there anything that you can kind of talk about from the first maybe couple weeks or month you were here that you remember about, as kind of like your first impressions of Las Vegas, or strong memories that you remember from first moving in?
Well, school started in September, and so we thought, well, we'll move down a month before to give ourselves time. A month before is August. August is the hottest month in Las Vegas, as you now know. And so we moved down here in just searing heat, and moved all our worldly possessions into this little apartment that we rented, and it was extremely hot. And I thought, well, I'll go see where I can get a job because, you know, my wife had a job as a teacher. And so I went to a private security place, and it was very scary. and I ended up not taking the job there. And it was my first introduction to a big city. My hometown was 25,000 people, and Las Vegas is quite a bit larger than that. Even then, it's probably doubled in size since then. But even then, it was pretty big, and it was a little bit of a culture shock coming to something this big. But I do remember the people in our complex giving us strange looks because in the middle of December we would go out to the swimming pool and swim because it was warm to us.
Yep.
But then I eventually I got lucky enough to eventually get a job at the Sands, and that working there is probably what sparked my real love for Las Vegas, because the Sands was still, you know, it's not one of the original casinos, but an early on casino. And it had some of its original things in there, like catwalks, which I talk quite a bit about in the second Rossi book, not so much in the first one, but those catwalks still existed. And before the cameras, that's how they used to watch the games. And so I've actually been up in those catwalks, walking around, looking down through the mirrored ceilings at the guests and the games. And so a lot of those old places still were still there. The Emerald Room, which I described in the first Rossi book, was still there. They didn't use it, but the room itself was still there. So I've actually been inside that Emerald Room. And the places that I discuss that have to do with the Sands in the two Rossi books, I've been to every one of those places that I talk about. So I know about them, and I know what they are. It's just a little bit easier to describe them when you've been standing in that room and looking at it.
Speaking of the Sands, you said that you were the guy that locked the doors for the last time in June 96?
Yeah, I actually, on June 30th, 1996, I went around and had the key and locked our doors for the final time. I was a supervisor on shift at that point. We kicked everybody out of the casino at a certain time, and then I walked around and literally locked all the doors that had probably never been locked in their entire existence. You know, all the outside doors to the hotel, and then we filmed a movie, and then I got a job at the Desert Inn for until they offered me the job at New York, which I took shortly after that.
Okay. And for people who don't know, the Sands is gone now, and there is the Venetian. Is there? Is that
the
true?
Venetian? Yeah, okay. It's the Venetian. Yeah.
That 96. That was almost 25 years ago this year. So
yeah.
How, like, knowing, and I was just thinking about this before we got on this call, like, there are now people that are walking around the Venetian, 25 years old, or, you know, a little bit younger, that have no idea that the Sands was ever there. Like,
no,
is that just
no, they don't.
So weird? Like, it's weird to me.
Yeah,
and I never even saw it.
They don't know anything about it. They don't know the history of it. Some of them don't care. And unfortunately, that's the nature of Las Vegas. We tend to just blow up our history, and it's gone.
Yep.
And that's really sad, because we have a lot of history for a town that only started in 1905.
I know.
You know,
yeah.
we really haven't been around that long, but
no.
we just blow up our past because we want the new and improved.
And
yeah.
I think it's so weird because we do that. And maybe that's why there are so many, like, people who live here, at least people I've met, do have a strong fondness for Las Vegas history, more so than any other city I've lived in. Like, they're more local history buffs than other places in the country. And I wonder if that's part of it. It's just like, you have to hold on to those memories because you can't actually go visit anything really anymore.
I think so. I also think because Las Vegas was a small town for so long, and then it kind of had this boom, where you still have a lot of people who live here that were here when it was a small town, and they still see it as that small town, whereas other people just see it as, you know, flashing lights and gambling, and they don't even understand the history that's here. they just see gambling or they think of the mafia, and that's as far as they go.
Let's talk about your books and your bookshelf.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, that's why we're here. So on your website, the earliest book listed is Haunted Las Vegas, but you actually did write something before that.
Yeah, I don't count that book.
Okay, that's fine.
Well, I'll tell you why. I learned that was a book. It was a great book to write, and I learned a huge lesson on that book. It's 25 real things that happened in Las Vegas, and so I wrote that book, and I was all excited about it, but I didn't follow my due diligence that I should have, and I didn't proofread it as well as I should have, and the editor probably didn't proofread it as well as he or she should have, and it is unfortunately riddled with mistakes. And what I learned is you really need to read through your books even after they come back from an editor. You really need to go through them, give them the once over. I now print the book. I don't read it electronically. I print it because for some reason in my mind, it's easier for me to see it in print. And I go over it with a fine-tooth comb. That book has been out since 2009. The reason that I joke that I don't count it, the stories are good. Everything in there is true. It's just some of the facts got like typoed or a date got wrong in there. It's been 2009 that I put that book out, and the publisher still won't let me put an update to fix the corrections, and it annoys me.
Oh, yeah.
So that's why I joke and say I don't count that book. And this is one of the problems with publishers. And problem's not the right word, but it's one of the things you have to encounter with a publisher. I didn't own the rights to that book because it's a series book. So I didn't have any say in the title. I didn't have any say in the cover. I was restricted to what I could put inside and how many stories and which stories could go in there. And but my name's still on the book, and so my name is associated with those things. Independently publishing, you obviously have you have total control over all of that, and to some extent, when you're publishing through a publisher and you're not doing a series book, you have a little bit more control, but not always. Sometimes publishers want to do things that authors don't agree with. Anyway, that's the long story of that book.
But it's a good lesson.
It is a good lesson. It was a very good lesson to have. It was unfortunate that it happened on my first book with my name on it, but it's better to have it there than later on. And so now every single book I go through with a very fine-tooth comb.
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely want to learn that early. And then, yeah. I mean, you have this, unfortunate experience, but you did keep writing. And you went on to write Haunted Las Vegas, which is the first book of yours that I read. Why did you decide to go with ghosts for your first kind of solo book?
I wish there was some great story about that. But what it really is when you're first starting out, you want to write whatever your publisher will publish. Mm-hmm. And this, again, was another series book. They had haunted San Diego and haunted lighthouses and haunted hotels. And I did a little bit of research and found out that Las Vegas is considered one of the most haunted places in America. Mm-hmm. And I had no idea. And so I proposed it to them and they said yes. And so it was really neat to do that book because I got to see my town from a different way than I would normally see it. Mm-hmm. I knew all the history of the mob and how it got started and different things like that, but I didn't know the haunted history of it. And so it was really kind of fun to go through that and see that and visit the places that were supposed to be haunted. All of those places in the book I went to. That still, by the way, is my best-selling book.
I believe it.
It outsells all of my other books almost by itself. Mm-hmm. So people love haunted stuff.
Oh, yeah. One of the things that I've actually talked about Haunted Las Vegas in an indie book club back in October. One of the things I loved about it is it's not just look at this place, here's this kind of haunted stories that people tell, here's, all these stats. You do kind of open with almost a fictional type look at what may have happened. Yeah. At that haunted place. And I don't see a lot of books do that, which I think is really, really cool.
Well, thank you. I love nonfiction. I still write nonfiction, um, but I don't like history books. I think they're boring and you can't get through them. But people love history. You know, there's tons of movies about history, but movies make it interesting. And I thought, well, you should write a book that makes history interesting too. And so I try to do it that way. I try to take people and put them in the situation, and so that they can kind of feel something, and then you can tell them the facts of what happened and how it got there, and then they're more interested in it because they feel a connection to it.
Your second book, I hope I have that right, Discovering Vintage Las Vegas, was your second book?
Actually, my second book was another in the series of It Happened In.
Oh, okay.
And it happened in Wyoming. I got that book on accident because I was talking to my editor. We were finishing up Haunted Las Vegas, and I just casually said, "So, how's it going?" And she says, "Well, going pretty good, but I'm having a hard time finding somebody to write the It Happened in Wyoming book." And I kind of paused and I said, "You know, I'm from Wyoming, right?" And she goes, "No, I had no idea you were from Wyoming." So that's how I got that book. And then after that came Discovering Vintage Las Vegas, which I was actually writing a bicycle guide for Falcon Press, which is a division of Globe Pequot Press, who I've written the other books for.
Right.
And I was writing a bicycle guidebook because I one of my hobbies is to mountain bike and to urban ride. And I was writing that book when the editor called me and said, "Hey, we have this book called Discovering Vintage Las Vegas. Do you want to write it?" And I said, "Sure." And she sent me the contract, and I looked it over, and I sent her an email back and said, "I think there's a typo in this contract because you want the book in 3 months." And she wrote me back and said, "Oh, no, we want it in 3 months."
Oh boy.
And I said, "Well, I can't do that. I'm writing this other book." And so she says, "Well, I will walk down the hall and talk to that editor." So she did. That book got put on hold. And then I got the Vintage Las Vegas book, which was a blast to write. What I did with that book is there's a group that people who have been in Las Vegas for a long time that meet at the Omelet House. And so I went around and asked them, I said, "Just give me the 10 places that you think people should know about, places that people that are still here and that people can visit." And I took everybody's list, and I had a certain amount of places that I could talk about. And the ones that were most popular on those lists, that's the one that I talked about. Unfortunately, the way Las Vegas changes, there's 4 or 5 places that are out of business already. In fact, one of them went out of business. If you read the intro to that book, one of them went out of business while I was writing the book.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was unable to include them in the book. It was a restaurant. There's a group of guys in there, and they came to Las Vegas and they ate there every year, and this was going to be their last meal at the place. And I wrote up this story about them, and I told them about the book, and they were all excited. And I was unable to put them in the book, so I still sent them a copy of the book with an apology that I couldn't put their story in there, and they're extremely disappointed about it. So I actually put them in Rossi's Gamble.
Oh, really?
Yeah, when
That's
he
awesome.
when he goes and eats in that Mexican restaurant in the book, and the group of people that are there celebrating, the 3 guys that are there celebrating, those were real guys, and those were the guys that I was supposed to put in Vintage Las Vegas.
I was actually curious, like how many of I haven't read Discovering Vintage Las Vegas yet, but I was wondering how many of the places are still around now, and it doesn't surprise me at all that places would have closed by the time the book was published. From writing to publication, things tend to go so quickly.
One of my favorite places, La Pamplemousse, which means grapefruit in France. He named his restaurant Grapefruit. Was around for years and years and years, and they just had to close this year. The pandemic put them out of business. And that was such a great place. It was a restaurant where you'd go in there and there was no menu. You would go in and you would sit down, and the waiter would tell you what they were making for dinner. You went there and you'd eat what they made. But there's a couple choices you could have, A or B, but there was no menu. You just came in and ate what they decided to cook that night.
That is so cool. I'm so sad to hear that they've closed this year.
Yeah, the owner was George LaForge, and unfortunately he passed away, and his wife tried to keep it going, but with the way restaurants were and the way everything happened with the pandemic, and they didn't really have a takeout business, so
Yeah.
to speak, and it just didn't work for them, unfortunately.
Moving on to switching gears a little bit here and moving on to something not pandemic related.
Okay.
So from discovering Vintage Las Vegas, is that when you moved into your fiction series?
Well, I'd always wanted to write a fiction book, and I've been writing nonfiction for a long time, and I'm very comfortable writing that. I know how to write it. I know how to do it, and I've wanted to write nonfiction. I tried. I mean, I wanted to write fiction. I tried a couple different books, and it just didn't work. Things didn't click for me, and I have a couple of very good friends who write fiction and make a very good living doing it. And I started talking to them and trying to figure out how to do it. And then it dawned on me that one of the reasons I was struggling is because I was out of my genre. I was trying to write in a world that didn't really interest me a whole lot. And the world that has always interested me, because I'm such a history buff, is noir, and especially crime noir. Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett, they're two of my favorite authors in the whole world. And I thought, well, this is dumb. I ought to just write in that genre. In fact, I had started Rossi as a modern day book. He was going to be a modern day in Las Vegas private investigator. And I had probably about half a book written of him as a modern day investigator. And then I thought, I'm not going to do that. And kind of a light bulb clicked, and I put him back in the 1950s era, and it just seemed to click. And I was very happy with it. It worked really well for me.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I couldn't imagine him in modern day. He just seems so like he fits right in the 1950s.
Yeah, thank you. That's good. That's very good to hear.
Yeah, and that's another good lesson is if, something's not working, if you're struggling, maybe it means you just need to totally rethink your approach and not be afraid to like totally change everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
So at the end of the first book, Rossi takes a job as an investigator for the casino. So is this where you start pulling on some of your experience? I mean, I know obviously he's in the 50s and you were in the 80s and 90s, but is there some of your experience in there?
Yeah, the investigation process is still the same, whether you did it back then or you do it now. It's just the tools that you use that change. So yeah, I plan to use a lot of experiences that I've had as an investigator in those books, and that's kind of the reason I did that. I also, well, I want to write about the Sands. I also thought, there's only so many things you can write about in a casino that happen, and so I didn't want to tie him to that. So I wanted to make sure that he was able to do things outside of the Sands, some things that may be related to the Sands and some things that aren't particularly related to the Sands. I guess I could have just had all sorts of things happen. Murder, She Wrote was a village of 2,000 people, and there was a murder every day there. So, so you can do that, but I thought that might be a little bit too much to just have things like that happen at a casino. And crime, one of the things about crime noir is it's very seldom, if ever, has a happy ending. So you don't want to write too much of that in a casino. But one of the things that I'm like most about being able to write in that genre, in that area, is I still, because I'm a history buff, I still like to put real things in there. So for example, in the first book, Huey's is a real place, and it still exists. It has a different name. The Golden Steer is a real restaurant that still exists under that name that you can go visit. Some of the people are real. Jeannie Gardner is a real person. Virginia is a real person. I worked with Jeannie Gardner. She was she ended up being a cocktail waitress, and she was still working there. She was a Copa girl. And then when they stopped having Copa girls, she went on to be a cocktail waitress. She was well into her 70s, I think, when I worked there. Still looked like she was 45. She's a beautiful lady. And so I kind of wanted to honor her because she was such a nice person, and that's why I put her in the book. But she was an actual real person.
In addition to the fiction series, which is now a third book is coming out there, right?
Yeah, hopefully it's gonna be coming out. But yes, there's a third book that's that's on the way. Yeah.
Okay. So in addition to that, you have another nonfiction book out right now. Can you talk about that and why you
Yeah.
decided it's not about Vegas?
No, it's Desert Dust. It's actually about Wyoming.
Mm-hmm.
And it came to me through an email. A person who has turned out to be one of my best friends now sent me an email saying, hey, I have this story about this horse, and I've done all this investigation, and it needs to be a book, and I've tried to write it, but I can't write it. So I sat with him. He did a 17-year investigation on this horse that was captured in the deserts of Wyoming. The horse was captured with an airplane. It was a wild Mustang, and it was a Palomino, which was pretty rare to have a wild Mustang that's a Palomino. People think Mustang's a breed, and it's not. It just means a wild horse. And it's strange to have a Palomino there. And so he caught this Palomino using an airplane. He got kind of famous for rounding up horses using an airplane. And he had a picture taken of the horse, and the picture won an award in the Denver Post, which was a big deal at the time. The guy who took the picture ended up getting it into the White House, into the Canadian Parliament, into the London Parliament. It got to be kind of famous. And the horse itself ended up being in a Hollywood short. They used to do shorts before movies at that time. You'd go to see a movie and there'd be a short in there, like a 15-minute, it was almost kind of like a mini documentary. And that's what this was about. And in the meantime, because the picture was doing so well and they were going to do the movie, the horse somehow got the name Desert Dust. Who actually named it is still really unknown. But there became a fight over the name Desert Dust, and they ended up going to court over it. And the court made one of the strangest Solomon-esque rulings I've ever heard in my life. And it was just fascinating. And the more he talked to me, I ended up talking to him for about 5 hours that day about the horse. And I realized that what was just as fascinating as the story of the horse was the story of his investigation and how he found all this information. He's the co-author on the book. His name is Gil Gilliland, and it follows Gil's investigation from what started it, because he originally thought the horse was the mascot for his high school in Rawlins, Wyoming. Turns out it wasn't. But that sparked a question by his daughter, which led him eventually onto a 17-year quest. He was also an investigator by trade, so he took immaculate records of everything he did and when he did it and what he found out, and it was just very easy to write this book from it. And when I talked before about publishers versus independent, we were actually with a publisher with that book, and they wanted, and I had a cover made when I was first thinking of doing the book. So to me, it's a very beautiful cover. And the publisher wanted to change the cover. They wanted to go with something that was kind of drab and brown and we just really didn't like it. They also wanted to change the book because I wrote it in the way that I wrote Haunted Las Vegas. And that is, I try to bring you into the story. So sometimes we do what we call them flashbacks. They're not really, but we didn't know what else to call them, where we kind of, Gil imagines what might have happened. And so we take you back into that time, what might have happened then. And we say it might have happened. We don't draw any conclusions in the book. We just tell the story and let the reader decide for themselves. But anyway, the book has won awards, and the cover itself has won awards. And so it makes you feel good when you hold to your guns. Like I said, we ended up leaving the publisher and putting it out on our own. But it's done really well, and it's a really good book. I will still write nonfiction books. I have a couple when I'm allowed to get back into libraries and other places to do research. I have a couple other books that I want to write. One of them about Boulder City, and the building of that town. I've written a book about that already. It wasn't quite the book that I really wanted to write, so I'm going to do another one and publish it under my publishing house.
You have another fiction book coming out soon. Is that true?
Yes, it's going to be released in April. It's going to be released first to free to people who join my newsletter. So anybody who joins the newsletter will be able to get the book for free for a limited time, and then I'll put it out to the public after that. But I want to reward people who have stuck with me and been there and have signed up for my newsletter. So anybody who's currently on my newsletter or anybody who signs up for the newsletter will get the book for free.
Note to self, make sure I'm on newsletter. So what can you tell us about that book? I know it's, maybe still under wraps, but it is paranormal noir is what you're calling it, right?
It's paranormal noir. What happened was I was watching Supernatural. I've been a fan of Supernatural ever since it started, and it just ended its run, and it's just, to me, it's just very cleverly written. And I was watching it one day and I thought to myself, because writers are strange, as you know, and do these things, I thought, what if Raymond Chandler wrote an episode of Supernatural? How would it change and how would it be different? And then that little seed stuck in my head for a little while, and then I thought, well, what if Raymond Chandler just wrote Supernatural? So obviously I don't have the same characters because I don't want to do that, and I don't own that series or have anything to do with that series. So you have to take that idea and put it in your own world. And then I thought, well, I'm really enjoying writing in the 1950s Las Vegas, and Las Vegas is supposed to be a hot spot for supernatural events. And you had the atomic testing here and all the other stuff that was going on. So you could just have a lot of fun with a character who dealt with paranormal issues in Las Vegas. And he's a different character than Rossi. He's far more brooding and sometimes a jerk, but he deals with a lot of the things that go bump in the night that other people don't want to deal with. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of set in the same time frame, so it has that same noir feel. I've had a lot of fun writing it. It's been a good book so far.
And do you anticipate this to be the first in the series as well?
I hope so, yes. I expect this to be the first in a series, yeah. Yeah, I already have the second and third one planned out, so hopefully if people enjoy the first one, if nobody enjoys it, then it'll be a one-off book. But if people enjoy it, yeah, I plan to continue that series.
And the title of that book is? I don't think we said the title of it yet.
No, the title of that book came to me one time because I like to do a play on words. Mm-hmm. I'm a big Beatles fan and a Jimmy Buffett fan. Both of those people kind of play with words, mix them up a little bit. And so I was thinking of the word nightmare. And then I used to work for Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer for a little while. And, Mayer spelled M-A-Y-E-R. And so I started thinking, well, what if his last name was Mayer? And so then I gave him a name that's really difficult to have as a child. So he went by his initials, which was PM. And so PM means night. And so people started calling him Nightmare. So the title of the book is Nightmare. And this one is Nightmare, Legend of the Skinwalker. If you take a werewolf and mix it with a witch that does black magic, you have a skinwalker. And there's a lot of different legends of the skinwalker. And the idea came to me because we were taking my 19-year-old daughter up to Reno to go to college there. And she saw some type of movement. And she said, "It's a skinwalker, Dad. I saw a skinwalker." So when she had just learned what a skinwalker was, and I didn't have any experience with it, so we kind of had to do a little bit of research while we were in the car, and she was telling us what a skinwalker was and all of that. And so I thought, well, that'll be a good one to start with. And so I'm kind of writing that for my daughter.
That is something I've heard the phrase before, but I didn't know what it was. So that's a new monster to be afraid of.
People have heard a lot about that because of the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah.
Right.
Which has a lot to do with UFO stuff too. But skinwalkers don't really have anything in their Native American culture, and they don't really have anything to do with UFOs. So I don't know how the two got mixed on that ranch. I haven't done a lot of research about that ranch at all. done a lot of research about skinwalkers. So yeah, it's got kind of a new monster to deal with. Yeah.
You've given us a lot of advice today, a lot of good advice for writers, and a lot of books we should all go out and buy and read and enjoy and endorse.
Yes.
But my last question is, what would you say if you were talking to a writer that's thinking about moving to Vegas or just moved to Vegas? What kind of advice would you give them, or any words of wisdom about the writing community here or being a writer here?
You know, there's actually a lot of writers here that people don't realize are here, and a lot of writers that are very successful. And there's several writers groups here that that depending on what you're looking for can help you out. You know, there's the Henderson Writers Group, there's the Writers of Southern Nevada, there's the Las Vegas Writers Group, and each of them meet at different times and different days, and they can help have a connection to writer communities. There's also several Facebook pages that help you with that connection to the community. My suggestion to any writer, if you're coming here and you're going to write about Las Vegas, is to really learn about it. I'm old-fashioned, and I'm kind of boots on the ground type of person. You know, go there and visit the places and see what they are, and look at the history that way, and certainly look on the internet, and certainly, you know, do that bit. The history of Las Vegas is still here. My next Rossi book is going to deal with the Moulin Rouge, which doesn't exist, but the parking lot where it was is still there, and you can go visit that space, and there's plenty of people to talk to about the Moulin Rouge who know quite a bit about it.
Is there anything else you'd like to endorse, promote, mention before we sign off here?
Well, mostly just my new book that's coming out is, you know, the Nightmare book, and like I said, it's going to be free to anybody who signs up for my newsletter, and I'll run that for a little while, and then I'll put it on Amazon after that, and Barnes and Noble and other places. And then of course Rossi, it's called Rossi's Risk, and it will be coming out probably towards the end of the year. I still have a little bit more research to do and a little bit more plotting to figure out before I get that thing done, but it'll be out towards the end of the year. And then hopefully, if we all get vaccinated and can get back to normal life, I'll start my next nonfiction book after that, which will be about Boulder City. Haven't decided what to call it yet, but there's a lot of great oral histories. They were wise enough to record those people's histories, and so I've delved into them a little bit, and I look forward to delving into them a lot more and telling their story.
Thank you again for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been wonderful. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, same here.